Hello and welcome to Mr. C History. Now I am in what I believe to be the most historical city in the UK. Where am I? Coventry, of course. I think the history of Coventry is the history of Britain. So join me now as I walk around this amazing city to see what point I'm trying to make. Now, not much is known about Coventry's early history. We think it was founded in about 700 AD, but one thing we do know is that the whole area around here was very forested. And indeed, they would have suggested that there was a bloke called Coffer, and he had a tree, and there's a piece of artwork here to symbolise this. We are in the middle of the 12th century priory, which I'll tell you a little bit about in a minute. But that essentially, we think, is the most likely case of where the name of the town came from. It was Coffer's tree, Coventry. Living in that priory was Leofric, Earl of Mercia, and significantly he had a wife known as Godiva, or Lady Godiva, very famous. Now there's obviously a very famous legend that goes with Lady Godiva, and the legend is that she was so saddened by the punitive taxes that her husband Leofric was putting on the people of Coventry, and she pleaded with him to say, can you please lower the taxes? Eventually he relented on one condition. He said, as long as you parade through the streets of Coventry on horseback whilst naked, I will lower the taxes. And true to her word, that is what she did. But there was a proclamation to say that all the locals had to close their shutters and turn away so they didn't see her naked, and her long hair was covering most of her delicate areas. But there was one traveller called Tom who peeped a look, and that is where we get the phrase peeping Tom from. And then Leofric kept his word and lowered the taxes. Now, is any of this true? Well, it's true that Lady Godiva existed, and so did Leofric, but not so sure about that. I mean, there are a lot of contrary things. First of all, the story doesn't come out until about 200 years later, so that's a bit dubious. And it was made popular by a man called Roger Wendover, who has been described by other historians as a bit gullible to various different stories. Read into that what you will. The other thing is, many of the facts don't quite back up. Leofric was not a brutal, oppressive leader, and indeed, he was famously quite popular with the people and generous, gave them gifts, etc. And of course, this is around the time of 1066, around the time of the Norman invasion, and Leofric was kept in post. So obviously, he was nice enough to William to be, not too despotic, I don't know. And the other idea, of course, is, was she actually naked? There are stories of people doing this sort of penance, but instead they would be in a shift, a sort of a nightie, as we might call it now. Naked in terms of medieval terms, of course, but not really. So, no, I'm sorry to pour scorn, but I'm not sure much of the story is true, but still, a heroine of Coventry. This is Spon Street, and it's got the highest concentration of medieval houses still left in Coventry. Some, admittedly, were moved here after the Coventry Blitz, but it's a little bit further out of town, so that's perhaps why they survived. And this is actually a good reflection of what a powerful medieval powerhouse Coventry was. It was given its royal charter in 1345, quite early on to be given city status compared to many others, which shows its testaments, and it got its money from wool. It was hugely wealthy, and indeed many kings like Henry V and VI, they would come here begging for money, looking for money so that they could fight their wars. It's a very, very important place. But more importantly than that, in the 1450s, during the War of the Roses, Margaret of Anjou moved the entire royal court to Coventry and set up Parliament here, and it met here several times. So for about 3 or 4 years in the 1450s, Coventry was capital of England. Yes, this was the centre of power during the War of the Roses for a few years. Just shows you the significance of Coventry in this amazing medieval town that it once was. Now there's pockets of medieval buildings all over Coventry that survived the Blitz. But this is Chelmsford Manor. Now this is interesting because this was the home of Edward the Black Prince. He was the son of the great Edward III, the great king of the 14th century, 50-year reign, and he was Edward the Black Prince was the father of Richard II, from the Watching My Peasants the Revolt video, for that one. So he didn't make it to the throne, unfortunately, but he was such a great hero. He's known as the Black Prince because of his black armour, and indeed he's famous for his military prowess in the 100 Years' War, the Battle of Crécy, Battle of Poitiers. He led the vanguard. He was a ruthless soldier of the time and a great hero. But as I say, unfortunately, he died before he could take the throne. He was the heir apparent, but he lived here in Coventry. this little section of road is unbelievably historic, excusing the bin, of course. But you've got these lovely old walls of the old Guildhall here. You've got the ruins of the old cathedral just right here. And you've got this amazing Tudor building here, built in 1500. Look at this amazing Tudor beam. You can get right up close and touch it. It's absolutely incredible. Just this tiny small section of what Coventry would have been is still here. It's so wonderfully well preserved. It's fantastic. Now, Coventry is perfectly located in the middle of the country, surrounded by canals like we have here. This is the canal park, and railways, etc. all could connect to the north and to the south. This meant it became an industrial hub. I've already mentioned about wool and that they eventually moved on to sort of silk, and then they were really good then at making little machines, things like sewing machines and watches. But definitely the most important thing was bicycles. By the 1890s, 70% of the world's bicycles were made here in Coventry. Indeed, here they invented the safety bicycle, which is the two wheels are the same size with that frame, what we think of as a bicycle today. Before that, there were those ridiculous penny farthing things. Here was the birth of the modern bicycle. This naturally morphed onto motor cars and indeed motorbikes. Triumph was based here and Jaguar came here, and this was one of the centre of the British automobile industries. Brilliant stuff. What was the effect of this? Well, obviously the city quadrupled in size, and all those lovely medieval, the town walls crushed and taken down to build the new city. And indeed the other big effect was wealth. By 1937 there was a poll done. They assessed every town in Britain, and it was seen that the people of Coventry had the most disposable income. They were the richest people in the land. Coventry was an industrial heartland. All this industrial heritage meant that by 1939 Coventry was producing lots of cars and armaments for the war effort. It was also producing that technical knowledge. They had the radios. All the radios the Allies were using were being made here in Coventry. This meant it was a target for Adolf Hitler and his bombing campaign. He also knew of the wonderful medieval centre, the prize, one of the best in England, so he targeted it. And indeed, on the evening of the 14th of November 1940, 400 German planes dropped 500 tons of bombs on Coventry. At that point, no city in the world had ever faced so much aerial bombardment. There was a firestorm, and indeed the whole of the city centre was engulfed in flames. A particular target was here, the Cathedral of St Michael behind me, and the provost there, Richard Howard. He was clambering, trying to save the building, save the roof, but alas, it failed, and the cathedral crumbled to the ground. And this now is one of the main symbols of Coventry, and the Coventry Blitz, as it became known. If you go in there, it's amazing. You can walk in this wonderful red sandstone, and you look in, and the sort of jagged teeth, things like jagged teeth. Amazingly, the tower still survived. You can actually go up it as well, and that's the one that you see behind me here. You can still see where the columns would have been along the nave, which is absolutely fantastic. But some real amazing things stand out. One is at the back in the altar as this cross. One of the timber merchants, one of the people who were going through the ruins, they found two planks of wood that were once the beams to the medieval church, and they tied them together as a cross and put it at the altar. That is still there. And behind it is a message which that provost, Father Richard Howard, had written down in 1946, just as the emotions were still raw. He wrote on the back, "Father, forgive." And this is the main point about Coventry. This is why Coventry is so amazing, and Coventry Cathedral in particular, the old one, is particularly amazing. This is not a symbol of anger, of terror, of misery, of victimhood. This is actually a symbol of reconciliation, of peace. We must move on from the war, and the people of Coventry were prepared to forgive. An amazing, amazing building. Now, as you can imagine, the propaganda machines were rife on this. Obviously, the British newspapers saying how awful and terrible this was, but interesting, the Nazi ones were saying what a great victory, and indeed they created a new word, Coventrynen, to coventrate, to totally destroy. They use this as a warning, saying, we've just done this to Coventry, we will do this to everyone else, watch out. Very, very powerful stuff, a harbinger for the doom of the Second World War. Now, after the Second World War, Coventry faced a choice. Do you rebuild as it was before with the old streets and the medieval centre? Or do you do away with all that, sweep that aside and build a futuristic new wonderland? Well, they primarily decided on the latter. You know, this Coventry became this real symbol of modern Britain, a ring road all the way around, and a utopia of pedestrianisation, and that this indeed what we have here. The precinct, we're still under the shadow of the old cathedral here, but we have this wonderful pedestrian style thing here. Now, when it came to rebuilding the cathedral, they had that decision. Do you sweep away with the old and destroy the old cathedral like we've been to already and build something new? Or do you do them both at the same time? Thankfully, the architect Basil Spence he sort of amalgamated the two wonderfully. Built between 1956 and 1962 in a wonderful modernist style, and it's sort of, the new cathedral, as I say, is attached nicely to the old one. It's absolutely incredible. If you go inside, there are unbelievable things. The windows are beautiful, the vast west window. You've got these amazing stained glass windows there. Not a very sunny day, unfortunately, so we couldn't quite, they're not at their full pomp. There's an amazing font, which is this big stone from Bethlehem, which is extraordinary. There's an amazing portrait there of the Stalingrad Madonna, which is actually it was a painting that was painted during the Battle of Stalingrad by a Soviet soldier, and there's a copy there. This, again, symbolism of the war. But the most amazing thing I love there is the Coventry Cross of Nails. These are amazing. We spoke about the cross that's in the cathedral made of wood, but also what they did is they found lots of nails there that came from the roof in the old cathedral, but was destroyed during the Coventry Blitz. So what they did is they've decided to make crosses from these nails. There's quite a few of them. The original one was here. But what's happened is the city of Coventry, and indeed Coventry Cathedral, has given many of these to places which there are similar symbolisms, of course. They are places like the Frauenkirche in Dresden, horribly destroyed by Allied bombing. There's also some in Hiroshima as well that have gone through there. Now, this is an interesting point, actually, is worth making now. Coventry definitely was not destroyed as much as Dresden and Hiroshima. The death toll here in Coventry pales into insignificant compared to those two. Absolutely. Nobody's trying to compare that in any way. They were brutal and horrible and worse in terms of that. But Coventry really was, as I say, this harbinger, the first. Yes, we had Guernica in Spain, but this was total annihilation. The power that can come from the skies first came out here in Coventry. So Coventry's that first symbol of that. And I do think that's an extremely important point. Another amazing thing about those Coventry nails is that every boat in the Navy now, called the HMS Coventry, will have a set of these nails put on it as a sort of symbolism, which is fantastic. And interestingly, in 1982, during the Falklands War, HMS Coventry was sunk by the Argentinians outside Falklands in the Atlantic. And Navy divers, after it sunk, went down and dived down to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean to fetch these nails. This is the power of symbolism. This is how powerful they are. This is why Coventry is so important. Now, initially, Coventry did very well in the 50s and 60s. The automobile industry was still strong, but that declined. And by the 70s and 80s, Coventry became a great symbol for that nationwide British phenomenon of industrial decline. And many of these new utopian, amazing, futuristic buildings started to look quite grey and depressing and run down. Indeed, Coventry really struggled. In the 1980s, it had the highest rate of unemployment in the country, and it has struggled with its modern past. I think Coventry felt left behind by the post-war European consensus, and indeed that perhaps explains the high proportion of people who voted to leave the European Union here. But still, I think things are looking up. There is more, the unemployment is down. It was recently the UK capital of culture, and I think it's great, so please do come. Wasn't that absolutely brilliant? Now, it was, we've gone through it all with Coventry: the Norman conquests, medieval England, the Industrial Revolution, World War II, and modern Britain. Coventry has been through all it, been at the forefront, and is still an amazing symbol of it all. What a fantastic place. Please make sure you do come. You'll have an amazing time. Well, I hope you've enjoyed that so much as I have, as I clearly have. Please don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.